Let's strip the polish off right now. If you keep being disrespected, ignored, or emotionally manipulated, there's a reason. And it's not out there. It's in your structure. The world does not respect kindness without limits. It consumes, it tests, it pressures until it finds your weak point. And when it finds it, it uses it. That's the brutal reality no one posts in pretty quotes. You think you're being mature by over-explaining. You think you're evolved by tolerating betrayal. You think you're strong by swallowing disrespect to keep the peace. But in the psychology of power, that's not strength. It's predictability. And predictability is strategic weakness. Whoever needs to be understood at any cost has already surrendered control. Whoever feels guilty for setting boundaries has already taught others how to manipulate them. Here's what hurts to admit. Many of your wounds didn't come from other people's malice. They came from your inability to cut access. You called excessive attachment love. You called emotional dependence connection. You called emotional reactivity sensitivity. Meanwhile, the world read it all as unlimited availability. And unlimited availability never generates respect. It generates use. The psychological power they don't want you to discover is simple and dangerous. Become difficult to use. Develop strategic silence, emotional mastery, strategic coldness in decisions. Not to become cruel, but to become untouchable. Because when you stop reacting, stop begging, stop explaining, something shifts in the social field. You stop being a target. And now comes the question that truly matters. Are you willing to abandon the weak version that seeks validation? Or will you keep saying that's just how I am, while the world decides your value for you? He remembers it like it was yesterday. Sitting in front of someone who was subtly disrespecting him with an almost faint smile, he tried to talk it out. He over-explained, justified his feelings, showed good intentions, and walked out smaller than he walked in. It wasn't just rejection. It was realizing that without noticing he had taught that person to exploit kindness and cross boundaries. And that's when he began to understand something about the psychology of power that few truly understand. The world doesn't break someone all at once. It does it in installments. A comment ignored here, emotional manipulation there, guilt you accept without questioning. Before you realize it, you're stuck in a cycle of emotional dependence, trying to prove your worth to someone who has already decided not to respect you. Perception versus reality. He thought he was being mature. In brutal reality, he was being trained to be used. It was in that phase that he faced the hard truth. The world does not respect kindness without limits. It's not about becoming a villain. It's about emotional control, self-mastery, strategic silence. It's understanding that invisible power doesn't shout, it observes. He learned that dominance begins with internal discipline, not external aggression. And when someone stops reacting, something in the game shifts. So he decided to become version 2. No longer the weak version, no longer reactive, untouchable, unshakable, impossible to manipulate. The world didn't change, he says. I changed. I stopped being easy to break. And this is where the transformation begins, because when someone understands this strategy, they realize there were always 2 versions inside them, and one of them is about to take control. He often says something uncomfortable. Most people don't suffer because of others' malice, they suffer because of their own lack of boundaries. They confuse kindness with unlimited access. They believe constant generosity generates respect, when often it generates disrespect. In the dark psychology of relationships, anything that is too easy loses value, and no one notices when they start being used. They only notice when they're already emotionally exhausted. The root error is simple and dangerous, giving full access, expecting automatic consideration. He has seen this happen countless times. People with a strong presence in public, but vulnerable in private, always available, always understanding, always explaining. And when they are ignored or betrayed, they feel guilt for protecting themselves. That's not virtue. That's lack of boundaries disguised as maturity. He learned in practice that exploiting kindness is predictable behavior. It's not personal, It's structural. Where there is no self-mastery, someone tests. Where there is excessive attachment, emotional manipulation arises. It's the brutal reality of human dynamics. Without emotional discipline, you become open territory. And open territory never remains neutral for long. Being ruthless here does not mean cruelty. It means strategic coldness in decisions. It means emotional independence, self-control, internal sovereignty. It means understanding that silent authority is born when you decide what enters and what leaves your life. And when that starts becoming clear, the difference between version 1 and version 2 becomes impossible to ignore. He explains it as if holding a mirror in front of the viewer. There are two versions living inside the same person. Version 1 over-explains, apologizes even when not wrong, tolerates ingratitude and calls it maturity. It has good intentions but lives reactive, trying to avoid rejection and conflict. Deep down it fears being feared and ends up being ignored. Version 1 believes persistence generates respect. It thinks that if it speaks more clearly, is more understanding, gives one more chance, everything improves. But the psychology of power shows something else. Excessive explanation weakens the perception of dominance. The more you try to justify yourself, the more insecure you appear. Perception versus reality again. Good intention, weak result. Version 2 is different. Strategic silence. Strong presence. It doesn't chase validation. It doesn't negotiate autonomy for emotional crumbs. When it notices emotional manipulation, it reduces access. When it senses disrespect, it doesn't debate. It distances itself. That is self-mastery. That is strategic intelligence applied in practice. He often says the real turning point isn't external, it's internal. You are no longer the weak version. Few understand this, but dominance begins when you decide to stop rewarding behaviors that disrespect you. And when that decision matures, something inside the person begins to change in an almost irreversible way. He doesn't deliver content, he delivers rupture. He states with almost uncomfortable firmness, there are 8 shifts that separate those who live being used from those who become relentless. 8 decisions that build someone untouchable, unshakable, with strong presence and silent authority. This is not light self-development. It is psychology of power applied without anesthesia. He doesn't promise comfort, he promises transformation. Because the hard truth is simple. The world does not respect kindness without limits. It respects control, discipline, self-mastery. It respects those who don't beg, who don't over-explain, who don't negotiate autonomy for emotional crumbs. And few understand this because it requires abandoning the victim identity. He makes it clear, you can keep being kind and keep being ignored. Or you can learn strategic coldness, develop invisible power, and become impossible to manipulate. It's not about being feared for violence, it's about being feared for emotional stability, for controlled unpredictability, for silent dominance that doesn't need to announce itself. And he provokes, stay until the end. Because if you apply these 8 shifts with strategic intelligence, you don't leave better. You leave unrecognizable. You won't be the version that accepts the minimum anymore. You'll be the version that sets the standard. And the first shift begins exactly where almost everyone keeps making mistakes. He doesn't start by talking about the ungrateful person. He starts by talking about you. Because in the psychology of power, the problem is rarely who tries to exploit kindness. It's who keeps offering access after recognizing the pattern. The hard truth is that ingratitude doesn't hurt only because of the act itself. It hurts because it exposes a lack of boundaries you've been ignoring. And everything you ignore emotionally, someone uses strategically. He learned this when he realized he was always available to someone who treated him like an option. Always understanding, always patient, always ready to see the other side. It sounds noble. But perception versus reality. What looked like maturity was emotional dependence in disguise. He wasn't being generous. He was afraid of losing. And fear never generates respect. It only creates space for emotional manipulation. In the economy of respect, access is rare currency. When you give your presence, time, and energy to someone ungrateful, you communicate something silently. I accept little. And the world responds to what you accept, not to what you desire. Brutal reality. If someone lies and you stay, you teach that lying is tolerable. If someone betrays and you soften it, you teach that betrayal has no cost. The turning point happens when you replace reaction with strategy. It's not arguing. It's not threatening. It's gradually cutting access. Strategic silence. Less explanation, more distance. Absolute self-mastery. You don't announce you're withdrawing. You simply become more selective. And when someone realizes they can't use you anymore, they begin to feel the invisible consequence. And at that point, pain stops being weakness and starts transforming into power. He says something few like to hear. Pain is not the problem. Interpretation is. Most people turn rejection into low self-esteem, betrayal into victimhood, disrespect into self-criticism. But in the psychology of power, pain is data. Strategic information. The brutal reality is that every pain points to a pattern of yours that needs correction, not pity. He remembers a rejection that almost made him doubt himself. The first reaction was emotional reactivity. Explain, justify, try to regain control. Only later did he realize he was reacting out of excessive attachment. It wasn't love. It was the need for validation. And when he stopped asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and started asking, "What did I ignore?" strategic intelligence began replacing victimization. He often uses a simple analogy. Pain is a fire alarm. Ignoring the alarm doesn't put out the fire. If someone betrays you repeatedly, it's not bad luck. It's lack of boundaries. If someone manipulates you through guilt, it's not fate. It's absence of emotional self-control. Pain reveals where your strategic coldness has not yet been built. Turning pain into power is an act of discipline. It's sitting with discomfort and extracting lesson, not drama. Writing hard questions. Which boundary did I not set? Which fear kept me here? Which part of me accepted the minimum? That's where invisible power begins to be born. Because when you learn from pain, it stops breaking you and starts armoring you. And that naturally leads to the next shift. He observes something curious. Most people don't suffer from lack of love. They suffer from excess explanation. They want to be understood at any cost. They want the other person to see their side, recognize their intention, validate their truth. But in the psychology of power, whoever needs to be understood too much has already lost the position of dominance. Because dependence on validation is the gateway to emotional manipulation. He himself fell into that trap. He would organize arguments, prove coherence, detail feelings, as if logic guaranteed respect. But perception versus reality. The more he defended himself, the guiltier he seemed. And the more he revealed his weaknesses, the more he handed over the manual to his own buttons. Over-explaining is teaching where to press. Killing the need to be understood is not becoming cold. It's developing self-mastery. It's accepting that not everyone deserves access to your internal narrative. If someone insists on misinterpreting you, perhaps the misinterpretation is strategic for them, and you keep trying to convince someone who has already decided not to understand. That is emotional dependence disguised as maturity. Strategic silence changes the game. A short sentence. I disagree. Period. No justification. No begging for acceptance. Absolute emotional control. Because when you don't need to be understood to feel valid, you become impossible to manipulate. And at that moment, the next shift begins demanding even more courage. He often says something that dismantles many people. Whoever begs loses power before finishing the sentence. It can be begging for attention, for response, for consideration, or for a conversation to fix things. The world observes posture, not intention. And in the psychology of power, excessive attachment is a sign of emotional dependence, and dependence automatically reduces the level of respect. He remembers the first time he decided to walk away without explaining. There was no epic speech, no drama, just strategic silence and distance. Fear came first. Fear of losing, fear of seeming cold, fear of being misunderstood. But along with fear came something unexpected: autonomy. And autonomy generates strong presence. Because when you choose, you command. The brutal reality is simple. Whoever chases validation becomes an option. Whoever chooses with strategic coldness becomes a priority, or becomes an absence that is felt. And absence is powerful. It's like oxygen. People only notice when it's missing. If you always reply in seconds, try replying later. If you always chase, try observing who comes. Practical strategy, not theory. Strategic detachment is not cruel indifference. It is emotional sovereignty. It is understanding that you don't need to beg for what should be natural. When you stop asking and start selecting, you activate invisible power. And the more you control your own neediness, the more untouchable you become. And this is where boundaries begin gaining a new dimension. He explains that a boundary is not a wall to shut the world out. It's armor to protect value. Most people associate boundaries with rudeness, but in the psychology of power, boundaries are a sign of self-mastery. Whoever doesn't impose consequence lives in constant emotional reactivity, and reactivity destroys silent authority, because whoever reacts too much shows they can be provoked. He has seen this countless times. Someone makes a disrespectful joke. The person laughs to avoid conflict, but internally feels disrespect. The next day, the tone worsens. A week later, intimacy becomes a license to devalue. Everything starts small, and what is not corrected early becomes a pattern, brutal reality. An effective boundary is not a long speech, it's a clear consequence. If someone shouts, you end the conversation. If someone devalues, you reduce access. If someone tries to manipulate through guilt, you respond with strategic silence. It's not aggression, it's emotional discipline. It's saying with actions, not here, and repeating that until the behavior changes or the person leaves. When someone realizes you don't negotiate your principles, something shifts in the emotional field. You become harder to test, harder to exploit kindness, harder to manipulate. And little by little, your strong presence begins speaking before you even open your mouth. And that naturally leads us to the shift few truly master. He often says silence is a language almost no one learns to speak. Most people fear silence because they associate it with abandonment, rejection, loss of control. But in the psychology of power, strategic silence is pure dominance. Whoever talks too much gives away position. Whoever reacts too quickly reveals neediness. Whoever stays silent at the right moment controls the rhythm. He realized this in an old argument. Before, he would have responded immediately, defended his honor, explained his intention. This time, he chose self-control. He read the message, breathed, and didn't reply. The discomfort was intense. But something curious happened. The other person started explaining themselves. Perception versus reality. Whoever reacts less appears more secure. Silence is not absence. It is invisible power in action. When someone tries to provoke and you don't offer emotional leverage, the attempt dies in the air. Emotional manipulation depends on reaction. Without reaction, there is no control. It's like pulling a door that has no handle. You simply can't find where to grip. Mastering silence requires discipline and strategic coldness. It's not ignoring everything. It's choosing when to speak and when to withdraw. Sometimes the strongest sentence is, "I understand," and nothing more. When you control the timing of your response, you control the dynamic, and that prepares the ground for an even more strategic move, something involving loyalty and predictability. He often warns something that sounds almost controversial. Blind loyalty is strategic vulnerability, not because loyalty is bad, but because absolute predictability reduces your invisible power. In the psychology of power, whoever declares themselves 100% unconditional eliminates their own margin of negotiation, and the world rarely respects what seems guaranteed. He has seen this in friendships, relationships, and even at work. The person who says, "I'm always here for you no matter what," often becomes the lowest priority, not from conscious malice, but from human dynamics. Perception versus reality. When someone knows they don't have to win you over, they stop investing. Guaranteed access reduces perceived value. Strategic loyalty is different, it's selective. It's built on reciprocity, not neediness. That requires self-mastery and emotional independence. You can be firm, reliable, and fair without being predictable or dependent. It's strategic coldness in commitment. You are present but not available for any disrespect. Being ruthless here means protecting your own sovereignty. It's not betraying before being betrayed. It's not handing total control of your emotional stability to anyone. When people realize your permanence depends on respect, not excessive attachment, they begin acting differently, and that is exactly where the final shift is born. He closes the cycle with something that seems simple, but is rare. Becoming untouchable is not about being cold. It's about being emotionally unreachable. Most people still live reactive. A comment changes their mood. An ignored message creates anxiety. A rejection triggers low self-esteem. Whoever masters themselves masters the environment. Self-mastery is the highest form of dominance. He realized certain people only had power while he reacted. When he stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to win debates, control shifted sides. Brutal reality. You are only manipulable while you have exposed levers. Guilt, need for validation, fear of rejection. Cut the levers and the game ends. Becoming untouchable is building an internal structure that does not depend on external approval. It is emotional independence applied daily. If someone criticizes unfairly, you observe. If someone provokes, you choose whether it deserves a response. If someone tries to exploit kindness, you reduce access. Strategic silence. Discipline. Plus emotional control. And when this consolidates, something powerful happens. You no longer need to prove strength. Your strong presence communicates sovereignty. Your silent authority commands respect before the conversation even begins. You are no longer the version that bends. You are the version that chooses. And when that identity solidifies, the world starts responding differently. Now the question is not whether the world is hard. The question is, will you keep being easy? Because after everything you heard here, you can't pretend you don't know anymore. You understood the psychology of power. You understood that perception versus reality defines how people treat you. You understood that without self-mastery, there is no lasting respect. So tell me, where are you still tolerating what you know you shouldn't? Where do you still feel guilty for setting boundaries? Who still has access to your energy without deserving it? If you keep reacting out of neediness, you'll keep being manipulable. But if you choose discipline, strategic silence, and emotional independence, you become impossible to manipulate. You don't need to become cruel. You need to become difficult to use. Untouchable, unshakable, with strong presence and silent authority. The world may keep testing, it always tests, but you won't be the version that bends anymore. You'll be the version that observes, decides, and acts with strategic coldness. Now I want to know, will you keep accepting the minimum, or will you start setting the standard? If this content confronted you, leave a comment right now. I will not break again. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here you don't learn to be likable. You learn to be strategically respected.